My name is Christina Anderson. I am 35 years old and not much of a social media user. I run a small cafe in New York, but I've told my family that I've been a waitress for over a decade. The reason is simple: to make it easier to refuse when they ask for money. I have been paying off my family's house mortgage for years, a necessary defense for me. From a young age, the difference in how my brother Jonathan and I were treated was clear. I was always tasked with housework because I was reliable, while he was exempted because he was a boy. I was sent to a cheaper public school because money was tight, while he attended a private school. I was told to give my part-time job earnings for the family, but his earnings were his pocket money. By the time I graduated from high school, I had earned a scholarship and was able to leave home. In college, I worked 3 jobs to cover my tuition and living expenses. Still, I regularly received messages from home asking for help because things were tough. At first, I sent small amounts, but as I started my career and my income increased, their demands grew. Before I knew it, I was covering most of my family's living expenses. When I tried to refuse, my mother would break down crying, and my father would berate me. Jonathan would also tearfully accuse me, "Are you going to abandon the family?" I wanted to be loved by my family. I wanted to be recognized. And I wanted to meet their expectations. Because of these feelings, I continued to support them, even if it meant cutting back on my own life. I clung to the illusion that they loved me. Meanwhile, Jonathan was always pampered. He actually dropped out of community college but demanded a large allowance under the guise of living expenses and tuition. He had new clothes and cars, and he enjoyed vacations. His lifestyle, and our parents' lifestyles, depended entirely on my earnings. On my 35th birthday, after a busy day at work, I returned home from the hustle of the cafe to find a notification on my smartphone. There was a message from my cousin Scott on social media. Thinking it would say happy birthday, I tapped it without a second thought. At first, it seemed like a random video, perhaps a family gathering or a funny old clip. But then I heard my mother's sharp voice. "Christina should be more grateful. Without us, she would only be a dishwasher." My stomach turned. The video was shaky, like someone had dropped their phone. It seemed they didn't realize it was recording, but the conversation was clearly audible. "Christina's a poor loser." My father's mocking laughter followed. "But at least her salary helps pay off our house mortgage." Everyone was laughing. I clenched my smartphone. What if Christina stops sending money? Jonathan asked while grinning. "Don't worry." My mother answered. "We've made her feel guilty. She's too weak to say no." I felt frozen. Christina, that's my name. It's not about a fictional character or a joke. They were talking about me. I had been covering their house mortgage and debts for years, sacrificing my savings to keep them from hardship. Frozen, I kept my thumb on the screen. Suddenly, the video disappeared with the message, "This message is unsent." Scott must have realized the mistake and hastily deleted the video. He must have hoped I hadn't seen it. I should have immediately confronted my family. I should have accused them. I should have told them that I knew everything. But instead, I put down my phone and pretended I hadn't seen anything. At that moment, I decided not to react right away. Deep down, the suspicions I had harbored for years turned into certainty. They did not love me. They would never love me. And it was time to take back my life. I sat staring at the smartphone for hours. Those words kept swirling in my head. Christina should be grateful. Poor loser. Too weak to say no. There might be some misunderstanding. It might just be a joke. There might be a context I'm not aware of. But deep down, I knew the truth. They were serious with those words. The worst part was that they weren't wrong about one thing. I was too weak to say no. How many times had they made me feel guilty and ended up supporting them? How many times had I put my own life on hold to give them everything they needed? I had continued paying the house mortgage for my father's temporary financial hardships for years. I also paid for Jonathan's expenses, even though he never graduated from college. My mother's endless emergencies always conveniently occurred on my payday, and I responded without hesitation. I thought that's what family was supposed to do. The next morning, I woke up as usual, but everything seemed different. The sunlight was filtered through the curtains as I brewed coffee as usual. But deep down, I had this realization. It felt like I was seeing my own life from the outside for the first time. I picked up my smartphone, and there was a message from my mother. "Good morning, sweetie. Are you doing okay? I was just worried about you." I stared at the message. It was always the same. My mother never just sent a message to check on me. There was always a reason, always a hidden plea. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the follow-up came. "By the way, the payment deadline for the house mortgage is coming up. Can you send it by Friday?" The same cycle, the same pattern. But this time was different. I placed my fingers on the keyboard and started to type a reply. Normally, I would have said, "Of course," or "No problem." I might even have apologized for taking so long to reply, so as not to make them feel bad. But this time was different. I deleted everything and just typed, "I can't do it this month." I stared at the message for a few seconds before pressing send, then set down the smartphone and waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes passed, then the smartphone vibrated. "What do you mean you can't?" I could feel my mother's irritation through the screen. I had never said no before. I didn't reply immediately, instead taking a sip of coffee while letting my mother stew in her confusion and rage. More messages arrived. "This is serious. We're counting on you. You know we don't have any other options, right?" Then a message from my father came. "Christina, I heard Mom is having trouble. Are you okay?" I almost laughed. Okay. Of course, everything is fine. After years of sacrificing for their life, the moment I refuse once, they panic. But they never asked if I was truly okay, if I needed help. Yes, their concern was not about my happiness, but only about their flow of money. My feelings and hopes were irrelevant to them. I took a deep breath and replied, "I have unexpected expenses this month and can't send anything. Sorry." That was it. No explanations, no excessive apologies. And I waited. What happened next told me everything I needed to know. The silence that followed, after years, was deafening. I had said no, and they didn't know how to handle it. I stared at the smartphone screen, watching the 3 dots appear and disappear. Then it stopped. My mother had tried to type something but stopped. I could imagine her sitting, fuming with rage, trying to figure out how to change my mind. And finally, my mother's reply came. "What unexpected expenses? Is there something more important than family?" The usual tactic to make me feel guilty. I didn't reply, leaving the message as it was. Within a minute, the next one arrived. "If we can't make the payment, we might lose the house. That would be your responsibility." The usual card, trying to shift the blame to me, make me feel guilty, and manipulate me. "We raised you. We took care of you when you had nothing, and this is how you repay us." I clenched my teeth and gripped my smartphone. They took care of me when I had nothing? That's a joke. I went to school on my own and worked 3 jobs to escape that house. But as soon as I started earning money, they clung to me like leeches, draining me dry. I had nothing. They took everything, and nothing was left. My smartphone rang again. This time it was from my father. Christina, listen, families have responsibilities. Don't trouble your mother. You understand her feelings, right? If you send the payment for the house mortgage, everything will be fine. No more pretense of kindness. Only demands remained. I put down the smartphone. My heart was pounding. I needed time to think. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and slowly took a sip while staring at the wall clock. Over the years, I felt something changing within me. This moment was frightening. What if I stopped the payments? Would they hate me? Would they abandon me? But now, I knew the truth. Until now, at least there was a pretense of love and care behind their demands, wrapped in phrases like, "for your own good," and, "because we're family." But what I saw now was the cold reality beneath that false facade. They never loved me. They only loved what I could give them. Taking a step forward would reveal their true nature. I picked up the smartphone and saw a message from my brother. "What are you thinking, Christina? This is unacceptable. You're being selfish. The family needs you, and you're acting like a spoiled brat. Grow up and do the right thing." It was the moment the last mask fell. My heart pounded in my ears, and a voice message notification from my father appeared. My hand trembled, and I placed my thumb over the play button. I felt this would change everything. I hesitated for a long time but finally pressed the small play button. My heart pounded against my ribs as if it might burst. My father never sends voice messages. If he has something to say, he usually infuses his texts with fake kindness. Passive-aggressive, but sweet enough to make me feel guilty. But this time was different. As I slowly pressed the play button, I heard my father's voice, sharp and filled with urgency. "Christina, listen. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but your mother is going crazy, and Jonathan is furious. You've always been a bit ungrateful, but this is too selfish." My stomach clenched, but I kept listening. "You must be making good money, even as a waitress, right? We're struggling, and suddenly you've woken up and don't care anymore." I couldn't help but snort. "Christina, you owe us. All the things we've done for you, the sacrifices we've made. We even gave you life, and why are you trying to leave? Are you pretending we don't exist? What kind of daughter does that?" I heard a sharp exhale. I thought it was over for a moment, but my father's voice turned darker and colder. "If you really want to be that person, fine. But don't expect us to forgive you. Don't come back. Even if you realize how much you need us and come crawling back, once you cross this line, there's no going back." The confused message ended, and only silence remained. The words disappeared, but my ears still rang and my hands tingled. I should have been afraid, panicked, and hurriedly apologized. But instead, I was calm. I felt liberated by their admission. They didn't love me, didn't respect me, didn't even see me as a person. To them, I was just a walking ATM, a being whose worth vanished the moment I stopped dispensing cash. If that was the case, maybe it was time for me to become truly worthless to them. My smartphone rang again. A final ultimatum from my mother. "Christina, this is your last chance. Send the payment for the mortgage." After staring at that message for a long time, I blocked her without hesitation. And my father, and my brother. For the first time in years, I felt free, or so I thought. The next morning, my brother Jonathan came to my house and knocked on the door, sending chills down my spine. It was still early morning, a time when most people would be asleep. The sun was barely starting to rise. I thought about ignoring it. But then the knocking sounded again, this time more persistent. As I reached for the doorknob, my heart was pounding inside my chest. When I opened the door, there was no mistake, it was indeed Jonathan. His face was twisted between anger and despair. He looked like he hadn't slept, his clothes were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot and emitting a mad glint. "Are you serious, Christina?" His voice was as sharp as a blade. "What's going on?" I said, blinking and feigning calm. "Good morning, Jonathan." He scoffed and ran his hands through his already disheveled hair. "Don't act like it's nothing. You've blocked everyone. Mom is panicking, and Dad is a mess. You're cutting us off, treating us like we don't exist." He leaned against the door frame with his arms crossed. "Don't you understand, Jonathan? I'm tired of being treated like a piggy bank." He clenched his teeth. "That again, always that same story?" He chuckled bitterly. "Jonathan, I've been paying the family house mortgage for years. And just once, I said no. I drew a line just once, and you call me a selfish brat. Dad said he can't accept me. And now, you come to my house as if I've committed a crime." He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. I continued. "And stop pretending to care about me. I saw the video Scott took." His face was drained of all colors. "What are you talking about?" "The video was sent by mistake on my birthday on social media. Everyone was sitting around laughing at me, calling me a pathetic loser who can only wash dishes and saying I should be grateful for the chance to pay the mortgage. It was a joke," he said. "Just an exaggerated joke." My voice was quiet but as sharp as glass. "Do you understand, Jonathan, how it feels to hear your own family talk about you like that?" He rubbed his face with his hand and exhaled roughly. "Christina, listen. It's okay." I interrupted. "If you want money, if you want someone to take care of you, look elsewhere. I'm done." He stood frozen, staring at me. For a moment, something raw flickered across his face, but it quickly vanished. "So, this is the end for us?" he muttered. I looked him straight in the eye. "Yes. It's all over. I'm the owner of a cafe, not a waitress. That's how I've been able to maintain my own life while paying the house mortgage. You might not remember, but the workplace I told you about was of course a lie. I've been doing well and will continue to do well, without any of you." His expression hardened. His mouth twisted uglily as he spat out, "Fine. If you want to be a selfish woman, go ahead. But don't come back when you're lonely and no one is around." With that, he turned his back and left. I stood watching him go. My chest ached as if it was being squeezed, but my backbone was straight. I closed the door and exhaled a trembling breath when the phone rang. Looking at the ringing phone, my mother's name was flashing on the screen. I had blocked the smartphones and social media, but I hadn't yet handled the house phone. This time, I simply answered and made my position clear. "Mom," I said in a calm voice. "That's enough. I can't do this anymore. If you continue to call or message, I will take out a restraining order. I've had enough." "Christina," she shouted. "We raised you." "No," I said. "You didn't raise me. You ignored me until I could earn money, and then you treated me like an ATM. Goodbye, Mom." And I hung up the phone. I opened my laptop and began to type. I collected all the records of payments I made for them, every transfer, and every check I sent over the years to clean up their messes. It was time to remind them of what they had taken from me. I started the email with this. "Here is a detailed record of everything I have done for you over the years. I will no longer be your lifeline. Nor will I be an ATM. I will not allow you to make me feel guilty for choosing myself. Consider this the final settlement. You can no longer rely on me, but you should know how much money I have lost. I believe that families should help each other, not exploit each other, so I sacrificed everything. I attached the payment records and sent the email. I also forwarded the same email to my lawyer to start the process of obtaining a restraining order. I sat back deeply in my chair, absorbing the weight of my decision. No more phone calls, no more guilt, no more illusions of them having any power over me. They might continue their manipulation and lies and empty promises, but I would no longer participate in their games. A month later, a call came to the house phone from a payphone. I hesitated but answered, and it was from my father. Christina. His voice was lower than before, unable to hide his tension. Will you listen to me? Say what you need to say quickly. This is really the last time. I'm still in the process of getting a restraining order, but it will be completed soon. I leaned against the counter and spoke dispassionately. It's about the house. My father paused and chose his words. The bank has given a final notice. If there isn't a payment by next week, it will be seized. And? Can you? My father's voice trembled. Help us just one more time. This is really true. We won't ask from you again. We'll manage on our own after this. Manage on your own? I chuckled bitterly. It's been a month since I stopped helping. Has anything changed during that time? My father was at a loss for words on the other end. In the end, nothing had changed. Christina, please. His voice turned pleading. We're your parents. We're your blood relatives. Blood is thicker than water. Blood is thick. I laughed out loud. Then why was Jonathan always special? Why did my part-time earnings become family property, but his state is? Why did you buy him a car when I was struggling in college? No, that's enough. I said calmly. I have nothing more to give you. Goodbye, Dad. Wait, Christina. My father's voice was urgent. I understand how you feel. But this time it's really serious. Your brother is being chased by debt collectors. Dangerous people. If he doesn't pay. What do you mean? I hadn't intended to ask further, but curiosity got the better of me. My father hesitated before starting. Jonathan has gotten into gambling. It started with small bets, but he tried to recoup his losses. How much? At first, it was a few $100s. But he borrowed from an underground casino. And from high-interest lenders. My father's voice trembled. Now it's over tens of thousands of dollars. These people aren't legitimate lenders. They're connected to the mafia. I sighed in exasperation. Jonathan's irresponsibility wasn't a surprise. He had always been coddled as a child, protected from the consequences of his actions. And now, he had become addicted to gambling and owed a large debt to a criminal organization. That's Jonathan's problem. I responded coldly. And now it's your problem too, Dad. But it's not mine. Christina, please. My father was now completely frantic. Just $3,000. You can make that in a month at the cafe, right? $3,000? I exhaled in disbelief. You don't understand the weight of $3,000, Dad. Please solve your own problems. With that, I hung up the phone. My father tried calling back several times, but I unplugged the phone line. Last night, my brother Jonathan came banging on my door, his breath reeking of alcohol. Christina, open up. His voice was rough, and he was clearly drunk. I know you're in there. Through the intercom, I responded calmly. Go home, Jonathan. I'm not helping you anymore. I will call the police. You ungrateful. He began to curse. It's all your fault. Because you abandoned us, we're suffering like this. I silently turned off the intercom and called the police on my smartphone. 15 minutes later, a police car arrived and took my brother away. That was the last interaction I had with my family. The next day, I began preparing to move. I cut off all contact completely. Never again would their attempts to reach me disrupt my life. I was free. A year after getting the restraining order, my cafe was thriving, and I had recently opened a second location. Surrounded by new friends, I was learning the joy of spending time with people who valued and appreciated the real me. Through mutual acquaintances, I occasionally heard about my family. It turned out the house mortgage I had been paying was much higher than the actual value of their house. My father had taken out multiple loans against the house without telling me, in addition to the mortgage. Luxurious living, expensive cars, trips abroad, all financed by the support and loans I provided. Despite appearing to be an ordinary office worker, he was actually living a debt-ridden, pretentious life. The amount was far beyond what their actual income could repay. When my support abruptly ended, their facade of a life quickly collapsed. Unable to cope, my father committed embezzlement at his company, which was soon discovered. He was fired and arrested. As for my brother Jonathan, he was being chased by debt collectors, and no one knew his current situation. The last sighting reported that he had turned to alcohol and eventually developed alcoholism. My mother was left alone, and eventually, the house was foreclosed. She moved to a cheap apartment on the outskirts of town and now works as a cashier at a local supermarket. Ironically, the moment my support stopped, all their lives fell apart. Hearing these stories, I felt nothing. They were simply facing the consequences of their actions. It wasn't my problem. My cafe chain continued to grow steadily, and I made a name for myself in the business world. I didn't need anyone. This independence was exactly what I had always wanted. On the wall of my office, there's a small frame with handwritten words. You live not to meet the expectations of others, but to pursue your own dreams. This is my story. A story that began with quiet defiance and ended with complete liberation. Above all, this story is written by myself.